So we wanted to start off each of our parts with just talking about what we do specifically. So specifically, I work with adolescents that are in residential treatment. My company is Midwest Christian Services, and we get juvenile boys, usually from the court system, often from the Department of Human Services, who can no longer live in their home environments because their behaviors can't be maintained there. We treat different disorders and diagnoses, from anxiety to like oppositional defiance disorder to reactive attack disorder. There's really just a diverse pool of diagnoses. We also treat, half of our treatment is done with juvenile sexual offenders, so we have a unique program for them as well. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about, you guys can't really see our presentation, but it's on those back monitors right there, is the family connection piece. And that's something that is starting to change over time with the state, and that's something that I'm seeing in my position and that we're seeing as a facility, is that the state is beginning to acknowledge that the best place for children to be is at home with their families, and that has not always been what the system has pushed for. So now, instead of pushing for children to be in a more restricted care environment or in facilities, we're pushing for them to stay at home, which is a great thing. I was just recently at a training that talked about humans are the only species that are biologically different to be dependent on each other. So in the wild, if there is an animal abandoned by its parent, it would instinctually then get up, go find food, it would fend for itself, and it would try to survive. However, with humans, that is not the case. If a human baby child is abandoned and left, it will lay on its back and die if nobody comes to care for it. So that's something that is starting to be acknowledged with the importance of family connection and bonding with humans, with us, specifically that we're applying to how we function in the human services field. So this is research and science that's being acknowledged in our practice, but we know that creation was made like this. God created us to depend on one another and to have unity and the family structure the way that we were designed to. Then this creates attachment, right? So this is one of the biggest issues that we see with children being removed from their families, and a lot of the disorders that come out of it is because this attachment wasn't made. And this starts in utero when a woman is having a child, to attach with its parents, to know they're going to be cared for, to know that their needs are going to be met, and to kind of give their whole functioning and psyche ease, right? So I know that if I cry, my mom is going to come. I know that if I'm upset, I'm going to be fed. So when these patterns aren't happening like they're supposed to be, we start seeing dysfunction. It changes the way that the body responds, it changes the way that the brain reacts, and we see children functioning differently when they haven't had these connections made. So their brain chemicals and the way that they're reacting is already kind of at a heightened level. So we all have like a baseline where we're calm and what is normal, and then when these functions and patterns don't react, respond, and attach the way that they're supposed to, that changes. So for reactive children, or for children that have experienced trauma and get a lot of these diagnoses, they're already functioning at a heightened state. They're in survival mode, and their flight or flight instincts are kind of 24/7 rather than just in extreme situations with somebody adjusted. So some of the trauma movement in the social service field is huge and wonderful, and the questions that we're starting to look at when we think about the child's experience to kind of reflect these instincts and heightened state is thinking about the questions that the child is asking. Where am I safe? Where do I belong? Who am I loved by? Things like this. So this is how we can kind of regulate their experience. And that, again, starts with family connection. So the next slide that I have is talking about trauma. So these are the things that interrupt that normal development and functioning. And trauma is just kind of a hot topic word that is all over in the last, several years. And trauma itself can be defined as an event that an individual experienced that overwhelmed their ability to cope. So everything that they know how to deal with, from their adaptive instincts, their external coping skills, and their internal coping skills, was overwhelmed by an incident. So this is based on the person's experience, not necessarily something on a list that this happened to you and now you're traumatized, but based on their own experience of what happened. So then further so, trauma can be defined as something that makes a lasting impact physically, emotionally, mentally, and is detrimental to your functioning mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Sorry, this is really small on my phone, so I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything that I had here about trauma. Oh, okay, yeah, I definitely did miss something. So the biggest piece of research that we're kind of functioning on, and something that I wanted to talk about, is something called the ACEs study. And if you work at all in the field that we do, this is something that you've probably heard of. If not, you probably have not, but it's a really incredible piece of research, a study that kind of blew up and started this whole switch to being trauma focused. So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it's like a questionnaire to begin with, and it has 10 questions that are asking you about your experiences as a child. And it covers the normal trauma that we think of, the abuse and neglect, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional abuse, and then neglect. But it also highlights dysfunctional family homes. So it asks about, was a caregiver being abused? Was a caregiver or someone in your home struggling with a substance abuse issue? Was someone in your home or a caregiver struggling with a mental health disorder? Because the secondary trauma that's experienced by a child or a young person living in that home is relevant. And I think that the concept that if bad things happen to you, you're affected is something that's not new. However, the research that this study brought was above and beyond that, and it really changed how we look at trauma, because there was tangible statistics and evidence that the change that it's making is substantial and that we need to do something about it. So the original study took 17,500 people, and it followed and correlated their adverse childhood experiences to their health as adults and how they were impacted. And I have a couple of statistics, and I don't want you to specifically quote me because I'm doing them a little bit off of memory, but they're just really shocking, so I wanted to share some with you. So for the 10-question survey that I talked about that asks about what happened to you, you get a score, 1 out of 10, 0 out of 10, whatever it may be. So individuals that have a score of 4, that they can mark 4 things on this list that happened to them, they are twice as likely than somebody who has a 0 or under 4 to develop COPD, to have hepatitis or get hepatitis. They're 4 times more likely to experience depression symptoms, or be diagnosed with depression. And of this group that have 4 or more ACEs, 1 in 8 will experience suicidal ideation based on these traumatic experiences that happened. For somebody who has an ACEs score from 4 to 8, so 8 is, again, pretty high on the range of 10, the likelihood that they will attempt suicide is 1 in 8, versus the 0 to 3 category is 1 in 96. So there's a big change in what we're seeing in the symptoms and how people are being affected, and they're surprising because we expect things that are like emotional disorders, maybe some mental health, maybe some behavioral problems or relationship forming issues, but things like heart disease, we don't expect to be linked to childhood trauma. And I think that it's somebody that has an ACEs score of 4 or more is 2.5 times more likely than somebody who doesn't to have heart disease, to develop heart disease, which is the biggest cause of death in our nation. So it's really powerful research I could talk about it for a really long time, and I'm not going to, but I would encourage you to look at it. If you want to take the questionnaire, we all did it just today. It's just really powerful. But the uplifting part of this research was that the difference between somebody who experienced all of these negative health conditions or depression or having suicidal ideation, the thing that disrupted the correlation between what happened to you and then your health or what happened to you as an adult was the existence of one caring, competent adult. So if there was one person in your life who was caring, understood, was there for you, or tried to support you, it changed your likelihood to continue the cycle of poverty, your likelihood to struggle with depression, anxiety, your likelihood to not continue to secondary education. So just the existence of one caring, competent person made the change from all of these traumatic incidents as children. So I think that's one of the first things that I want to highlight for us as a ministry, that if we're just there for somebody, it really does make a difference. So then all of these things that I'm talking about, all of these traumatic experiences, all of these diagnoses, they really express themselves in different ways. And this is where I'm kind of going to get into like what I do on a daily basis. So you'll hear me talk about like with the boys or the kids because that's who I'm used to working with. And a lot of these things are just applied broadly. They can be applied to adults or the people that you know in your own lives. Something that I was thinking about when I was doing this presentation is that all of our 25 boys on our campus, we now go to, that we're connected with the First Church of Christ in Cherokee. And they go there every Sunday. And they are wild, and they have a hard time in Sunday school. They have a hard time just containing them. Shanice works in our school, so just the activities of daily life with this group of boys are incredibly challenging, and that's why they're there. But it reminds me that prior to being in residential treatment, these kids were all members of the community, and some of them are coming from this community. And there's lots of reasons that them or their families might not have been consistently involved in a church or ministry, and their behaviors and the way that they present themselves are a big indicator as to why, because they're the high maintenance individuals that many people would be less willing, less excited, less, the way that we have excitement in pursuing youth changes with some of the behaviors that we then see in these troubled youth. So the behaviors that we see on a daily basis is just a lot of defiance, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress that presents itself in different ways, a lot of lashing out, a lot of pushing, especially with like a reactive attached child who didn't form that bond. They're going to push you as far as you can to get you to stop. They want to see what your line is. They want to see how far they can push you before you'll leave, before you'll give up, because that's what they've experienced, is they don't have these firm attachments that no matter what I do, my mom will still love me. That doesn't exist for them. So they're pushing to see what your line is. Do you have a question? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. Because that trust, the mistrust, the trust versus mistrust is something that's developmental, just like the attachment. So if I can see, and part of that is a test as well, because if I can see how you're going to respond, so if I hurt your feelings, if I make you upset, are you going to become physical with me? Am I still safe? What can I do to kind of push that line to right it? Because they do want to be safe, and they do want those people to stay, but because of the question if and when somebody is going to leave and how much it takes, they're always pushing that line to see how far they can go, to see if, and it's always better for me to do it myself, but it's always better for me to do it myself rather than for you to leave me. So just these developmental things are really presented in different ways, and it feels like an attack. So that's one of the things that we talk about a lot when we do like trauma trainings, and we do a lot of self-care trainings, because the way that you experience it as a caregiver or a service professional or somebody that is working with these individuals is a lot of attack. There's this little acronym, it's QTIP, and it's quit taking it personally. Nothing is personal. I choose to come here every day. They don't choose to be here. Some of the things that they've done have put them here. So we do reinforce that you have gotten to this point because now we need you to assume responsibility so that you can fix it. But I choose to come here every day. I choose to be here for them. I choose to try and be that person in their life that they can know, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, that the next day it's a new day and I'm going to come and I'm still going to treat you the same way. I don't even know where I am in my PowerPoint anymore. So I guess I can go from that by saying that the other thing that's on the PowerPoint, this is one of the biggest pieces of what we try to create at our facility and what we can try to create then, I guess, in the church or in general when we're working with people with these different disorders. This is the stability cycle. So me being the same every day, no matter what happened yesterday, is part of that. Me responding to you the same way all of the time creates consistency. And consistency and structure create predictability. If you know how I'm going to be, if you know what is going to happen, then you can start to see what's going to happen every day. So if you know who and how and what every single day, that starts to create safety. If I know what I'm walking into, if I know what is going to happen, if I know that I'm going to do this and then this is going to happen, it starts to create some safety. Versus maybe the original situation or home setting of a trauma-reactive child is that every day was something different. Or I could do the same thing 6 days, but one of those days mom or dad had used and my reaction was going to be much different. Or maybe mom and dad were using 6 of those days and on the 7th is when they didn't have any patience anymore and were present, and that's where I got a negative reaction. So creating that consistency and that structure then allows them to feel safe, allows all of us to feel safe, because I know, even me as a well-adjusted adult, if I don't have consistency and stability, I start to lose it. I'm just kind of all over the place. I don't function as well, and that's because if we're not safe, if we don't have that consistency and stability that make us feel safe, we can't learn. So that's where this pro-social learning concept comes in. This is where we can learn new things. This is where we can form new relationships and where we can trust other people and where we can start to grow. So I like to call this the growth climate, and we create this growth climate with this stability cycle, with this structure and this consistency to create safety where then somebody can grow. It is a little different when you apply it to a church setting, but there are still things that I think that we can all think of that would make this consistency, this structure, and then this growth climate where people feel safe. Another thing that I do a lot of in my job is de-escalation. So we get a lot of kiddos worked up for lots of reasons that seem very senseless. Back to Shanice in the classroom, because from the morning to the afternoon, we have children that are on our campus in a transition school because they cannot maintain or are not safe enough to be transported to the public school district where we would like them to be. So they're in a transition place that is on our campus that we can be there to support and intervene in a situation that we need to. And in the morning on most weekdays, that is what a lot of the staff are doing throughout the day. And a lot of our job then becomes de-escalation. And you can't really see this photo on the back, but the picture that I chose for this was just 2 people sitting on the ground together, and one of them is noticeably upset. And this is something that I try to make the first thing that, you can use my phone, it's okay, that I do when I see a kid that is upset. A lot of the time, we're seeing a tantrum or a fit and some behaviors, some yelling, some aggression. And when it's kind of all out and the audience has been removed, you typically come back and see a child sitting on the ground or a child balled up or just kind of stuck right there because they're trying to get their point across, they're trying to express whatever they're feeling, they're trying to win whatever power they want to have in that moment, and it's just a kid on the ground a lot of the time when I'm coming back or when I'm de-escalating someone. And the first thing I want to do is sit down. I sit on the ground with them, I get down on their level, even though we're trying to reinforce the idea of, parents and control and being able to listen and follow directions and show respect to authority. that's not what's going to get to this kid in this moment. So just sitting down on the ground, being at the same level with them, being next to them, and a lot of the time listening, and that kid might not want to talk, and I'm just going to sit there quietly until they do. When we were going through this presentation, that's something that I related back to a biblical principle, and we were talking about Job and how he was mourning, and his friends came and they traveled and they sat with him and they mourned in silence for days. And I think that when I was reading that part seemed like comfort, right? They came and they grieved with him, and then when they started trying to tell him about himself, it stopped being this comfort. So then it was their advice and what you had done wrong and how you can fix it, but they just didn't understand Job's experience, and they were wrong. And I think that a lot of the time we come in and try to speak some wisdom or give them some information or say something that's going to fix everything, and usually there's nothing that I can say that's going to make it better. But if I sit down on the ground next to you and I show that I care and I'm here and I want you to feel better and be able to go on with the rest of your day, that those are the things that get across. So in a situation where we were to have maybe somebody having a panic attack or anxiety or some sort of behavior that we don't see in adjusted adults and children, that's some things that we can maybe apply there. Another thing is giving back control. So when these kids are emotional and they're having these behaviors, they're not in control. They don't feel in control of themselves, and they're overwhelmed by their emotions, they're overwhelmed by their thoughts, and they're not in control. So us telling them, you need to get up, we're going to get up, we're going to do this, you're going to listen to what I'm saying, that further strips them of that. And so some easy things that I try to implement to give them back some of that control so they can start to control those emotions and thoughts is to ask them, where can we go right now that you will feel safe? What do you need right now? How can I help you? Do you want to come sit in here and calm down? Where would you like to go? Who would you like to talk to? Because it might not be me. Yeah, and those are just some of the simple things that I can share with you guys about de-escalation. I always try to put a Z in it, and there's no Z, so don't listen to me. And then the last slide that I had was about building these lasting connections and relationships for us. So we talked about the consistency, the stability, and inclusion. Like Pastor Enger had mentioned, still including these people is important, making them feel like they do belong here, and that is as simple as every day is a new day. So whatever happened yesterday, whatever you said, however you acted, today is a new day, and I still want you to be here. Structure and clear expectations, a lot, especially with adolescents and teenagers. When we have well-adjusted children and children who haven't experienced, trauma or have these diagnoses, we can tell an 8-year-old instructions once and the rule twice, and then they know, and when they do it anyways, we know that they did it wrongly, knowingly, When it comes to the boys that I work with, I tell them the same thing at least 30 times a day. The prompting, the remindering, the clear expectations from 1 hour to the next, from one activity to the next, those reminders really do go a long way. And especially when they're the same all of the time, and that's part of the consistency and structure that we can build. Understanding, that's part of the not taking it personally, the being able to acknowledge how much trauma impacts somebody and how much these different disorders can really impact someone's life and cripple their ability to create pro-social relationships and grow. And unwavering was my last one, and that kind of brings it back to the no matter what happens. And I put the unwavering one because it was just something that was on my heart, because that's how I look at my relationship with God. No matter what I do, no matter what happens, it's always the same and it's always there. And forgiving and loving and not changing how he accepts me or looks at me based on those things. And so I think that's something that we can then promote in how we're working with individuals that have these disorders and struggle with those kind of behaviors. And that's all I have. Yes, you do. You covered almost everything.
Yeah, before we start getting to my question, just so that everybody knows, we're going to
I'm Eden Keller, and I work for Midwest Christian Services. My actual job title is a behavioral health intervention specialist, which is a bunch of big fancy words for I do their treatment programming with them, and my job is to teach skills. So this is typically coping skills, emotional regulation, urge management, impulse management, just to slow down. We work with juveniles ranging from 8 to 18 that have a variety of different disorders, and we're working for them to be able to maintain these, to be back in the community. Is that a good introduction? It's bad when I do it twice, I can't remember the first one.
My question is there a specific disorder that you struggle with attending to?
I don't know that there's a specific disorder, but there is a specific population that I know that I am not the best with. That is the young. And I think the population that I'm best with is the like 14 to 17 juveniles with like a criminal mindset, because I can talk logic. In the future. I can't do that with an 8-year-old. He wants toys in his mom, and he should have toys in his mom. And I struggle with them. They take a lot more patience, and there's no logic. You can't calm a 8 or 9-year-old down with logic, because an 8 or 9-year-old at my facility is a 6 or 7-year-old, outside. And my pursuits, they just don't work. So.
All right.
What I really enjoyed about what you're discussing is, I think it's for us to understand that these kids aren't bad kids.
Right.
They came out of a bad environment, and because of what, it's different than you talk about people with disabilities. There's not a lot though that can be done sometimes, but with these children, it's just taking the time. One person making an impact.
Absolutely.
Can reverse over time all of the damage done.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing you got to keep in mind with, like you said, anybody who comes to the church, this kid that's running around trying to cause trouble, there's a reason for it.
Right.
They're trying to push you away right now, so we can just have this established that you don't like being on bad.
Right.
So I can just,
Right, so then I'm not vulnerable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we get away from that and begin to see people as needy and accept them where they are, we have more chance to change them.
Mm-hmm.
And that condemnation is there.
Absolutely.